May 25th, 1989, Richmond, British Columbia. A car is found abandoned in the parking lot of a local shopping center. Inside, there's blood on the driver's door. Groceries are spilled across the seats, and a single gift-wrapped package sits quietly on the passenger side. The woman who owned the car is missing, but when she's found, the mystery would only get stranger. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the downright eerie. Today's episode is called The Stalking of Cindy James. A deadly game or a desperate cry? Cindy James was a 44-year-old nurse. She was a rule follower, quiet, smart, and generally liked by all. She was the sort of person who lacked order and had no interest in making waves or causing trouble. But in 1982, things started to disrupt her quiet life. One cool fall night, Cindy was just finishing up cleaning up after dinner, wiping down the kitchen counters, folding a dish towel over the sink like she always did. She was the type who kept her home as orderly as her life. Everything had its place. Then, just as she was heading to her bedroom to settle in for the night, her favorite book in hand, she jumps a little as the ringing of a phone breaks the silence that she was lost in. She wonders who could possibly be calling her this late, and for a minute she thought about ignoring it, but it could be someone needing help, so she went ahead and picked up the receiver and says hello. But on the other side, the person doesn't say anything. She can clearly tell there's someone there, though, because she can hear heavy breathing. It sounds deliberate, like the other person wanted to be sure she heard it. After several seconds, Cindy just hung up the phone and chalked it up to a prank. Now remember, this is 1982, so she didn't have caller ID or really any way to tell who was calling. So prank calls were a fairly common occurrence in that time period, especially among teenagers. But in the days to come, the same thing would happen to her over and over and over again. For weeks, then months. She would just get these strange calls from what sounded like a man breathing heavily on the other side. At this point, she's a little creeped out, but mostly annoyed because this person is wasting her time and they just won't stop this ridiculous prank or game or whatever this is. Even though the calls were really frustrating, they really didn't have much of an impact on Cindy's life. She still came and went to work. She still had fun with friends. Really, nothing changed. Until one evening in early winter, Cindy had just finished up her shift and was headed home. She was pretty tired and really just ready to relax a bit when she got home. But as she stepped inside her front door, she stopped. Because at her feet was this blank envelope. Someone must have slipped it under her door. Confused, she opened it up and pulled out the folded up piece of paper inside. As she read what was on it, her heart nearly leapt out of her chest. In words that were ripped and cut from magazines, there was a message. You're going to die. She immediately called her friend, who encouraged her to call the police. But Cindy, being who she was, didn't want to make a fuss. She eventually convinced herself that this was just another prank, however odd it was, and that she would be fine. Still, she began double-checking locks, looking out the blinds before stepping outside, and just being as cautious as possible at all times. But then another note comes. This time it's nailed to the side of her house. And this time she does go to the police. They tell her that they will investigate, but there isn't much they can do with just a letter made from magazine clippings. This was somewhat of a relief to Cindy. She felt like if the police weren't going to make a big deal about it, then she was likely overreacting herself. After all, no one had actually tried to hurt her. Maybe it really was just a bored prankster. Cindy's newfound comfort didn't last long. Whoever was doing this must not have been happy about her visiting the police station. Soon, Cindy would arrive home to see her porch lights were smashed. Then, another time, her phone lines were cut. Then her windows were broken. Cindy was getting more terrified by the day. She was sure someone was watching her. She was starting to see shadows of men lurking in her yard at night, just stalking, waiting, like they were only there to intimidate her. And every time she called the police, the men would vanish before the police would arrive. At first, the police would do a thorough investigation, but there were no footprints, no fingerprints, no evidence of forced entry. There was no evidence that any crime had been committed, or that there was ever anyone there aside from Cindy. But Cindy insisted she wasn't just paranoid. She said that someone had been playing some kind of sick, twisted game with her, that they wanted to torment her. But even if the police did believe her, there was no evidence, no trail to follow. That summer, it went further than letters and broken glass. Cindy's friend Agnes stopped by the house one afternoon to check on her. She knocked, but there was no answer. Cindy's car was in the driveway, so Agnes went around back to see if she was outside. But when she did, she noticed that the back door was slightly open. Agnes stepped inside to call for Cindy. She walked through the house, wondering where she could be, until finally she checked the basement, and there was Cindy, collapsed on the floor. She was barely conscious. A nylon stocking was tied tightly around her neck, and she had cuts on her body. They were small but deliberate. Agnes immediately called for an ambulance, and Cindy was rushed to the hospital. And when she regained consciousness, Cindy told the police the same story. Someone had broken in, attacked her, tried to kill her. Police began to question her version of events. They found inconsistencies in her story, and not only that, there were no signs of forced entry, no suspicious footprints, and that nylon stocking, they believed that she might have tied it herself. Cindy's terrifying ordeal was suddenly being treated like some odd cry for attention. But if Cindy was faking it, why? And if she wasn't, who was doing this to her? By now, Cindy James was living in fear. She had changed her locks. She had gotten a new unlisted phone number. She even moved to a new house, hoping to escape whoever was stalking her. But the threats, they followed her. One morning, Cindy walked out to her front yard and stopped cold in horror of what she was seeing. There, on her lawn, was her beloved dog, shaking uncontrollably. Someone had tied a string around his neck so tightly that it was barely breathing. She rushed the dog to the vet. Thankfully it survived, but to Cindy, the message was clear. We can get to what you love. And that was only the beginning. Cindy's windows were shattered in the middle of the night. Threatening notes kept appearing. Some burned at the edges, others smeared in what looked like blood. Sometimes the words were written directly onto her walls. And then there were the calls. The same breathy silence, sometimes whispers, sometimes deep voices growling things like, "You'll die soon," and always at night. But Cindy wasn't alone in her fear anymore. She had had enough. Enough of this not being taken seriously, and enough of this being harassed. She hired a private investigator, Ozzy Caban, and Ozzy believed her. He saw the evidence. He heard the calls. He even found Cindy one night outside her home, shivering, terrified, with a nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. But even he was puzzled by the logistics. He once said, "If she's staging this, she's the best actress I've ever seen. And if she's not, then someone is playing a very sick game." And that game kept escalating. A few weeks after she hired Ozzy, Cindy was found again, half conscious, lying in a ditch several miles from her home. Her hands and feet were bound. She had been stabbed in the hand with a paring knife. Pushed down into the grass beside her was a note. It read, "You're dead." But the really curious thing is that each time Cindy survived one of these attacks, there were no witnesses. No fingerprints, no DNA, no clues. And by this point, the police were no longer treating her like a victim. They believed that Cindy was staging the attacks, and that she was tying herself up, hurting herself, and just faking everything. So, still wanting to help her, they brought in psychologists. Cindy was evaluated multiple times, but the reports always came back the same. Cindy was not delusional, and she was not psychotic. She was very afraid, but sane. But still, the police doubted her. Even her own family was divided. Some believed her, others weren't so sure. And through it all, Cindy was just trying to hold on. She kept working part-time. She leaned on her friends for support. She even entered therapy. She just wanted this all to go away so she could get back to living her life. But the game, the stalking, the torment, it wasn't over. It was building to something, and whatever it was coming soon. By the spring of 1989, Cindy James had endured 7 long years of torment, and whatever or whoever was behind it seemed to be closing in. Her life had become a routine of survival, therapy sessions, police reports, hospital visits. Every knock at the door, every phone ring, it sent her heart racing. But still, she tried to live her life and just keep moving forward. On May 25th, Cindy went out to run errands. She deposited a paycheck, bought a Mother's Day gift for a friend's child, picked up some groceries, and then she vanished. Her car was found that night in the parking lot behind a bank. The driver's door was smeared with blood. Inside, groceries lay scattered across the seats, and that gift, still perfectly wrapped, sat quietly on the passenger side. But Cindy, she was gone. 2 weeks passed, and no one had heard from or seen Cindy. There were no signs of her anywhere. Then, on June 8th, a man walking behind an abandoned house made a grisly discovery. There, in the backyard, partially hidden in the weeds, was Cindy James. She was dead, lying on her side, her hands and feet tightly tied behind her back, and there was a black nylon stocking around her neck, again. And in her system was a cocktail of sedatives and tranquilizers, morphine, diazepam, flurazepam, enough to kill her several times over. But somehow, police believed that she might have done it herself. The autopsy baffled investigators. Yes, the drugs could have killed her. Yes, the knot was complex, but not impossible to tie alone. And the restraints? They were tight, but not beyond reach if someone was determined enough. The official cause of death, unknown event, not suicide, not homicide, just unexplained. But ask yourself this. Could a woman really drug herself into unconsciousness, tie her own hands and feet behind her back, and wrap a stocking around her own neck, and leave herself to die in a backyard? Or was someone else there? Someone who wanted to finally end their sick game. Police never found evidence of foul play, but they never found evidence of fabrication either. No conclusive answers, just theories, whispers. In her final days, Cindy told friends, "I'm afraid someone is going to kill me, and when they do, it'll look like suicide." She said this more than once, and she was right. When the dust settled, the death of Cindy James left more questions than answers. To this day, no one knows for certain what happened, but there are theories, lots of them. The first theory is the most straightforward, and the most horrifying. The theory that Cindy James was murdered. Supporters of this theory point to the sheer length of time Cindy was tormented. 7 years. They point to the letters, the death threats, the phone calls, the repeated physical attacks, and ultimately, the condition in which her body was found. The drugs in her system would have rendered her unconscious in minutes. How could she have tied herself up after that? How could she have dragged herself to that yard, bound and sedated, and staged her own death scene? Her family, especially her sister Melanie, firmly believes that Cindy was the victim of a relentless stalker. Someone who knew how to avoid detection. Someone who was methodical and patient. But then there's the second theory, one the police were leaning toward for years, that Cindy James staged the entire thing. They believed Cindy suffered from a severe psychological disorder, perhaps dissociative identity disorder, or a complex form of PTSD, that she may have been hurting herself, creating elaborate crime scenes, faking her own terror. The drugs used in her death, all available by prescription. And Cindy had worked in healthcare. She would have known how to get them, and how much was fatal. Even her therapist, Dr. Alan Connolly, admitted that Cindy may have been in a deep state of psychological conflict. But he also said, if she was fabricating the attacks, she didn't know she was doing it. And then there's a third theory, the most complicated and maybe the most tragic, that Cindy James was both a victim of an outside tormentor and of her own unraveling mind. That someone did start stalking her, but over time, as police dismissed her claims and fear consumed her, she began to spiral, blurring the line between real and imagined danger. If that is true, then the system failed her in more ways than one. She didn't just need protection. She needed belief. She needed help. Cindy's case was closed with no resolution. Her death remains classified as an unexplained event, with no arrests and no further investigations. But her story continues to haunt those who hear it, because no matter which theory you believe, one thing is certain. Cindy James lived in fear, and one way or another, that fear killed her. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Legends May Live. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or just made you think, please give it a like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And remember, some mysteries don't fade with time, they only get deeper.